So here we are again, John.
Episode 4. Welcome
Episode
back.
4, I know, and we've got 16 followers. If we take off friends and family, does that leave two?
All right.
No, we've got about 12 if we don't include friends and family.
Okay.
Remember that in the early days that there
hmm
wasn't there a friends and family button you had on websites to
hmm
tell your friends and family about your
hmm
latest blog post or what
hmm
have you,
Or anything, yeah.
or anything, yeah. So another 20 minutes of conversation with John Hovell and David Gertin. And we were just talking and thinking about what we're going to talk about because we normally leave this to the last minute. And, you know, given our interest in conversation, and this is about conversation, one of the questions that I often think about, and in fact, we've discussed in the past, John, is why in conversation we tend not, why in conversation do we tend not to ask why? So if, and I think we're as bad as culprits as anyone else. That if we're having a conversation and you say something, John, and I agree, I'm going to build in it. I'm going to tell my own stories. We're going to kind of be a little bit smug and congratulate ourselves that we agree on something. And then, of course, if we disagree, being who we are, we're going to disagree civilly, but we're going to have a, you're going to make your statement, and I'm going to pose a counter statement, and that's the way it goes. We either build on something or we try to knock it down. And it's only on occasions that I might turn to you or you might turn to me and say, "Why do you think that, John? Why do you believe that? What brought you to that conclusion?" Or the question I quite like is, "Why do you think you might be wrong about that?" Or
Mm.
if we're agreeing, why do we think we're both wrong about that? Why might we be wrong? In what way might we be wrong? Um, and it's very rare that we do it. It's very rare that I see other people do it. The only person I see talking about that a lot is Peter Bakassian.
hmm
He does it a lot. So
I
my
like his too.
question, my
He's
question,
got
you
that.
to kick the go on,
I was just saying, sorry, I jumped in too
pick up on
fast.
that.
Just to pull with Peter for a second. Peter has that one that I always like where, stand on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you
Yes,
find yourself? And then what would it take for you to take one step to the right to,
yeah,
on this whatever the scale of the question is, you say you're an 8, what would it take for you to be a 9? What would happen for you to be a 7? You know,
that's good.
those
He's
types
got
of
street epistemology, and there's a variation of street epistemology called spectrum street
mm,
epistemology. He's kind of a modern day Socrates. I follow him quite closely, and he goes around the world doing this. And I saw something this morning where he had had a conversation with somebody who had one point of view on a topic, and at the end of the text, he basically said, "I am looking for somebody who I can talk with who has an opposite point of view." So he's always deliberately going looking out for opposite points of view. He's
mm.
I say he's a modern day Socrates. But what I wanted, I was just going to ask you, what did you make of what I just got to say, and your thoughts on why we don't do that more?
Yeah, thanks. And I don't know, I think this is helpful to mention to everybody or anybody listening, or for us to look back on the little bit of prep we've done for these. Is you came up with a great list of 8 or 10 questions that might set us up for the next few sessions, which is great. And then, we start at 15 past the hour, but you and I dial in at the top of the hour. So we get a few minutes to sort of say, are we clear on the question? What are we going to talk about? And so I haven't like really slept on it or
Yeah,
researched,
yeah.
but I did. I wrote in Zoom chat here just for us. I didn't
Oh,
hit
okay.
send though. One, two, three, four, five different things that all immediately popped up for me when you said, uh, what is the art of asking questions? Or what is it about questions? Or what I hear you say now on this call is like, why don't we ask why is kind of what I hear.
Yes.
So I don't know. I don't know if I want to rattle off all these things. Maybe I'll just start with the why, and it's in reverse order on my list here. Um, One of the things I've been taught or practiced or trained, especially in organization development, is the framing. the timing and the framing of your questions and potential reframing. I think there's even a book out there that says something like change your questions, change your life, something like that. Um,
There is, yeah.
anyway, where I was going with it is you did it in your exact example right there. Why are you thinking like that versus what brought you to this line of thinking?
Hmm.
And I just have to share for me, and yes, I've heard it from others, but it does ring true for me is the the why questions, not always, but with great regularity, I tend to receive a why question as condescending. I tend to receive it as a
Yes, I hear
prove to me
you.
that you're smart, prove I have the right answer. Let's see if you do. Like not always, I'm exaggerating a bit for effect, but
No,
there's something versus a what brought you here or what causes that or what other ways that to me is an open-ended. And I know the intent of the why question is often to like understand, but I for me, or at least the way it lands with me, the reframing from any why question to a what question is kind of magical. Does that do anything for you?
sorry, I'm not too sure I follow that. You're saying a what question is sort of less challenging,
Or more open-ended,
more
more,
open-ended
more,
than a
it
why
lands as
question?
more curious to me, whereas a why question, if your question begins with the word why, it, I don't know, it lands different. It lands harsher. Most of the time.
I think you're right. I think, say if it came to politics and you told me that you supported Donald Trump, I might lean forward and say, why?
Why? Yeah, exactly.
And it's an attack, isn't it? It comes across that way. But
Versus if you said, what causes you to support, or how about what causes you to not support Donald Trump would be the question.
indeed, yeah, we tend to avoid politics here, don't we? But
Mm.
what the hell? Um, yeah, I think you're right. We could phrase the why question more diplomatically so it doesn't come across as a as an attack. But do you think that's why we don't do it
No,
more?
no, yeah, no. So I like that point too. No, I think this brings me over to another one I wrote here, dialogue mapping. So there's this whole knowledge management tool called dialogue mapping, where most people, when you take notes, you take chronological notes. If you're sitting in a meeting, especially if you take notes for someone else, this was said, then this was said, then this was said. That's how most of us take notes.
Mhm.
Dialogue mapping is different. Dialogue mapping, you listen to three or four comments in a row and then you just put a quick highlight on the piece somewhere on a piece of paper or online somewhere like a Miro board, and then you draw lines to show the relationships between comments. And my point of saying this is what dialogue mappers have found, I think you'll love this, there's often an
Why?
unasked question. Yeah, exactly. There's an unasked question in the room. The example that's always out there is pretend like you went to a budget meeting. You walk into the budget meeting, you don't even know why you're there. There's no question to kick off the meeting, or it's an unspoken question, and someone just starts saying, "Well, unfortunately, we have to cut costs." And nobody says why. Somebody says, "Oh, I've got a great idea to cut costs. We should do salaries, we should get rid of this program, we should get rid of this
Yes,
location."
yeah,
And then
yeah,
somebody else says, "Wait, we don't need to cut costs. We should increase revenue." And I've
yes.
got some great ideas for increasing. Do you see? Um,
But this is because we love to jump to solutions.
mm,
We love we're problem solvers. We love solving problems, and often we don't step back and look at the bigger picture and ask
and
that
the
question.
dialogue mapper does exactly that, and literally writes down in the notes if a question was asked, amazing, that gets written down. But more often than not, there was no one in that meeting, that example I just gave, no one said, what should we do about the budget? That question was never asked. It was assumed. Maybe it
Or
was the wrong question. And then when
I guess there was a what question. Say, well, sorry, what was I going to say? What's the problem we're trying to solve?
there you go. Yeah, yeah. But what is the budget situation right now? Right?
It's
And then same thing when somebody
just
said we should
stepping
cut
back.
costs, there was an unasked question of what ideas do you have to cut costs? As opposed to what are the pros and cons of cutting costs? Do you know what I mean? Like The
Yeah,
right people
yeah.
just jumped over to the next without actually putting the question
When you
out
say
there.
what are the pros and cons, again, it's reminded me of that question we said earlier. Um, how might we be wrong about this? Or why might we be wrong about this?
Yeah.
Which again rarely gets asked. We just get caught up. I often feel, even in sorts of conversations we have, we get caught up with the topic, especially when we agree. And it's just a lovely feeling when we agree and we're building on each other and it's going back and forth. And we just get carried away.
You wrote about epistemic bubbles and echo chambers. I
Yes,
loved that
that's right.
post. That was like a pivotal post for, remind me what was in that one? Because that also sounds like in those things, questions are probably not being asked, right?
I think what I'd written about was I was basically defining um, echo chambers and epistemic bubbles, and because there's an accepted view of what they are, but in academia they've got a slightly different meaning. Um, and I might have difficulty actually remembering the difference between them now.
Yeah, sure.
It's probably not worth me trying to remember right now. Um, but that's, you know, the epistemic bubble is where we don't talk. We either deliberately don't talk to other people, or we consciously don't talk to other people. You know, we talk to we talk to like minds, and
Mm,
so we don't see or hear about or engage with the greater world or other opinions. And of course, in some ways, if you and I have a conversation and we totally agree on something, it's kind of a self-created little bubble in some sense, isn't it? Which we could quite easily burst, and we should, because we should. In many ways, it's a lot more fun and a lot more interesting to disagree, or to look for um, ways in which we disagree, or look for ways in which we both could be wrong. Because you're going to go deeper, you're going to start to ask fundamental questions. Because you and I can say that we agree about something, but you've got one definition of whatever we're talking about, and I've got a different definition, and we say we agree, but we kind of agree about different things.
mhm.
Um,
That's the knowledge illusion, right? Like I think I know
so
what I'm talking about, but
it's an
actually not a
illusion
clue.
or delusion. I'm not too sure which. Yeah. And we do that. We'll do it all the time.
So the other thing, I hope this flows, or at least is interesting. Um, During the pandemic, there's a group out there called HSD, Human Systems Dynamics.
Yeah.
And every single day, Monday through Friday, so every weekday, Monday through Friday, really Monday through Thursday, they ran a 20-minute session, I guess just like this timing, where they called it two things. I always got confused. They either called it Power of Inquiry or they called it Inquiry is the Answer. I think it was more often
Okay.
called Inquiry is the Answer. And it was a little process they ran. Um, and I don't know if I ever saw you out there, but Monday through Thursday they would do that. And then on Friday they did a review of how did Monday through Thursday, is there any follow-up on Monday through Thursdays? And all they did was somebody would bravely raise their hand each, at the beginning of the 20 minutes each weekday. And they would, for I think it was 3 minutes. It's been a while. I honestly kind of forget. It's about 3 minutes, very short. They would describe a challenge that they were currently facing or currently involved in. Personal, professional, family, community, could be anything. A lot of professional challenges came up in the group. Great. All we did for the next 17 minutes was in Zoom, people would type questions, only questions. You type a question and you'd hit send. And then someone, there was like an MC, not a facilitator, but like a person that
Mhm.
would
Okay.
read out the names and say, David, please read your question. John, please read your question. And they would just go in order. So you type your question and then a few seconds later someone would ask you so that you know what I mean? There's like this like kind of waterfall of questions popping up. And the belief was inquiry is the answer. Like the questions themselves are the answer as opposed to some solution. Well, they had a few rules, but one of the main rules was please don't masquerade a recommendation or a solution as a question. And their examples, like, have
Yes,
you
yes.
tried blah blah
Have you
blah?
tried? Yes.
Haven't you
Yeah,
done blah blah
yeah,
blah? And that's, that's a solution
yeah,
masquerading
yeah,
as a
yeah.
question. And so
A
I
lot
guess
of
the whole
people
point I'm
do
trying to
that.
make there is I really think there's a skill, and that daily practice, I wasn't there every day, but I went lots. Um, it really fine tunes. It does something to your hearing of questions, seeing of questions, asking of questions. I don't know. It was a really powerful practice, I thought.
Yeah, I like it. Years ago, I took part in an exercise. This was face to face, where somebody maybe shared a problem that they had with the group, and everybody wrote a question down on a piece of paper, and everyone had to have a different piece of paper and a different colored pencil. So you couldn't identify who had written what. You just screwed it up and put it into a, well, metaphorical hat, and took it out, and the facilitator drew out the question and asked the question. And what that was allowing you to do was to ask very challenging questions without being identified. um, I'm not too sure whether that was a good way of doing things, but um, an interesting approach anyway. So we've got a few minutes left here before we draw to our close at about 20 minutes. How do you think we could get better at being more aware of our conversations, in real time, and asking such questions as to why might we be wrong here, or why do you think that?
So it's
You've
in
probably
that
got
case,
more experience in this than I have.
it's sort of beyond questions. It's just, oh, and I like that one. We've talked about it before, like um, awareness of uh, when someone asks a question versus when someone tells a story versus when someone gives a command, and
Mm-hmm.
then also noticing not just like individually each one, but collectively. Does this group ask lots of questions of itself? Does this group just give each other commands? Like,
Yes.
that what do our conversations look like? And then you and I would often challenge and say, that's not even a conversation. And yet we probably could be a little bit more gentle and say, it is a conversation, but did you notice the style of that
Yes, it's a style.
conversation? So yeah, that's like just being aware of the questions. And I guess if I practice my own questioning, I heard your question as like, how might we raise, or what can we do to raise awareness
Mm-hmm.
of what's going, and I think my response back to that is then with a question again, awareness. Like, what is awareness?
What is meant by awareness? Yeah.
Yeah, what like is awareness? This is a little bit what we talked about last time or two times ago. Maybe it was the first time. Is awareness taking action and doing something about it? Is awareness just seeing it and like observation? Is awareness like taking something in, thinking, processing, integrating, like all of these things? Like,
Yeah.
what's conversational awareness for you? Well,
You just touched on something else for me. I think, as you know, I quite regularly get together with another group, call it the Odyssey Lab, where again we're looking, there's 4 or 5 of us talking about conversation. And one of the things we were trying to do was create a process. And every time we tried to impose a process on what we were talking about, we never had the willpower to stick to it.
okay.
And one of the things I wanted to do, at least experiment with, is maybe have a little timer that goes off after 10 minutes, where you stop and you pause and you say, okay, are we talking about the things that we want to talk about? Is this
Yep.
conversation valuable? You do not so much an after action review, but an in action review. We, once we got talking, we forgot about it and we never used to do it.
Yep.
So staying aware in a good conversation is is very difficult.
Mhm. It's like staying present in the moment. You can grab it for a second, but then it floats away and you have to keep grabbing it.
Mm.
Mhm. The only one I wanted to mention, since I've got it in my notes, I actually have two. So let me mention really quick as we close. Dr. Kate Pugh has her conversational moves,
Oh
and
yes.
I don't think questioning, I think curiosity is one of them. And I think
Curiosity is in there,
underneath
that's for sure.
curiosity is questioning. So that just, just that feels like a direct reference. And then I also wrote this thing that I learned or saw a long time ago, PQ and I. It's called precision questioning, PQ and A, precision questioning and answering. And I probably have it somewhere, but they handed out this old 8.5 by 11-inch piece of paper, and on the front was like columns of types of questions you could ask, which I think directly it's like what, how, why, when, who questions, and like sub questions underneath it. And then if you flipped it over on the back, that was precision questioning on one side of the paper. The other side, they'd done all kinds of research on precision answering. And it was basically, it was a little bit harsh, but it was like if you listen to the question, if the person asks you a yes, no question, and that was like one of the types of questions, just respond yes, no. Do not offer any more because the question was yes, no. If they ask a list, like, tell me your top five references for this, just give the five references. You know what I mean? Like, they called that precision answering. And the debate was always, but is that a little bit cold? Is that
It's very cold. I love it's your congressional hearings in America where they give somebody a very complex question that requires a nuanced answer, and they say, right,
yes.
answer the question, yes or no. You won't let them off the hook. And of course, they wriggle and they squirm. And it's actually a lot of this comes back to curiosity. I
Mm.
think if we were maybe more curious, we would ask more questions.
And that was a powerful thing that a coach taught me was uh, turning judgment into curiosity, which basically meant,
Yes,
they kept
yes.
noticing anything I was judging. They were like, can you just notice and catch when you're judging yourself or someone else or
Oh, yes.
quality or just any kind of judgment and just flip it, just turn it into an honest, authentic question.
I think that's a really good point, and it's probably a really good point to end on, turning judgment into curiosity.
All right.
Let's
See you next week.
yeah, let's see what we come up with next week, shall we, John? Okay,
Thanks.
so once again, bye everybody.
Bye.